What's up, everybody? It might not seem like it, but the sun has been firing off pretty much like clockwork for the last couple years during the solar maximum. And we just had this really active sunspot region pass by popping off X's. And it's really mesmerizing to watch. I feel like Pippin in the Palantir Stone, or Mary, or whoever that was. One of them short guys. But yeah, this sunspot region just popped off three X class basically directly at us, and then I think there was just a fourth that's going to be leading a little bit. They're predicting level G-4 for this weekend. We'll talk about what happens when these double and triple up in a minute, but they're saying G-4, which is definitely enough to disrupt flights and satellites, and a very slight chance that it could affect the electrical grid. I'm definitely no expert, but I'm not feeling it on this. But I do think that we have a really good chance at seeing auroras at lower latitudes this weekend. And for once, I got some clear skies this weekend, so I'll be looking for that. But check this out on the Enlil spiral because it's all about the solar wind speed. And you got that first shot, and then the second and third right behind it. And if that front one is traveling slower than the ones behind it, then they all arrive at the same time. That was kind of satisfying to watch. Let's watch it again. So here's what I've observed in the past when you have these double and triple up is that first one hits and really weakens our magnetosphere, and the KP index just goes up almost exponentially. So even though these are all X1s, and I think the largest is a 2.4, which by itself isn't enough to really do anything, and I don't know the terminology to describe this, so I'll do this. If the first shock takes us to 80% deflector shields or magnetosphere with a KP1, then the second shock takes us to 60%, but the same amount of energy coming in jumps us to a KP4. Then the third shock takes us to 40%, but the same amount of energy coming in jumps us up to a KP8. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but it works in my head. Bottom line, every time I've seen these multiple shocks, then the geomagnetic storm seems to be a lot worse than they thought it was going to be. For the remainder of the year, I think we're right at peak intensity for this solar cycle, which keeps us at an increased risk of something like the Carrington event popping off. If you're new around here, that was, 1859, I believe, a major solar storm fried telegraph lines, and, miners in Colorado were waking up and cooking their breakfast to the Aurora Borealis, thinking it was daylight. And if that happened in today's world, we'd instantly go back to pre-industrial revolution times. And, not to scare the crap out of anybody, but it could literally mean about an 80% population reduction. I mean, you're literally talking about something that could fry every transformer out there on all these telephone poles that you see around you. These are already in short supply with regular demand, and if they all went down at once, then we're not talking years, we're talking maybe never it getting fixed. But enough doom and gloom. That's just so you know that it's a rare possibility. But we're definitely going through a shift right now, have been for the last 4 to 6 years. Whether this is a grand solar minimum or a magnetic reversal, I've given up on trying to label it. And looking back at the Dalton minimum and the events of the 1812 era, it looks like a whole lot going on. You had the New Madrid quakes and Tecumseh's Comet, then the Mount Tambora eruption and the year without a summer. And looking back on it, it's easy to look at that as a time of increased seismic and volcanic energy, but this happened over the course of years. Well, in our current cycle, we've had the Hunga Tonga eruption that sent shockwaves around the world, a cloud the size of France, and then we had the huge Turkey quake with huge casualties in the cities. It literally ripped this olive grove apart. Residents said that it was like a war was going on with all of the booms and the flashing lights because of piezoelectric discharge and earthquake lightning. And then there was Japan and the Philippines, and the list goes on. So in real time, it's just something happens here and there every few months. But I think looking back on it, you'll see this as a very active era. So this is definitely producing prime shaken weather, so we might see a big one pop off somewhere this weekend. But on the brighter side of things, no pun intended, we might be able to see the auroras. And they just updated this article saying it may be visible as far south as Alabama and Northern California. So I theoretically, pretty well anywhere above Texas, you might see it this weekend. And like I said, I finally have clear skies on one of these weekends when one of these are going off. So we'll see. Anyway, that's what's going on. If you guys want to hear my theory of how the scale of the official model of the universe we use doesn't really add up when you look at a tiny little 5 kilometer comet hit the sun, then you get this huge solar flare billions of times the size of Earth, then you can stick around and hear my spiel here. This was recorded on a video, so you might have seen it already. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Static out. The problem here is scale. And I hear this all the time. Energy in and energy out. The comet comes in and then there's a release of energy. But let me put this into perspective. All right. How big is the average comet? On average, they say that they're about 10 kilometers, 5 miles across. Really famous recurring ones like Halley's Comet is about 9 by 5 miles. The recently discovered Pons Brooks is a really big one at 18 by 30 miles. This has got a lot of attention for its devil horns or looking kind of like the Millennium Falcon. But these are really on the large side of your average comets. I mean, a lot of these are just a couple hundred meters across. If one of these were to plop down in the middle of the Pacific, it would be catastrophic for us here on Earth. But let's look at the big picture. Let's say it hits the water and causes a 3-mile high tsunami. Well, Earth's diameter is roughly 8,000 miles. And even if you're looking at this from a flat Earth perspective, that's 8,000 miles from the equator on one side to the equator on the other. So a 3-mile high tsunami at that scale would basically be like a dimple on a basketball. I mean, it's not even going to register. You see my tiny little smiley face there? It'd be about a 10th or a 20th of that size. It would be tiny. You wouldn't even notice it at this scale. Now, here's what they tell us about the impossibly huge sun. They say that 109 Earths stacked side by side would reach across the sun's diameter. And that's just in a straight line. If you look at the overall volume of a sphere, 1,300,000 planet Earths would fit inside of the sun. And they had to stamp their 33 somewhere, so they just said it's 333,000 times as much weight as the Earth. Some other size comparisons, I mean, they're saying that the sun is just unfathomably large, and that the solar flares that we're observing all of the time are 10 to 20 times the size of the Earth. So I showed you my size comparison of a 5-kilometer comet next to the Earth, which, you know, at this size, we're talking 1 pixel. So now let's look at that clip again. You're telling me that a 5-kilometer comet coming in, you know, that would be a speck of sand compared to the whole ocean is causing all of this to happen on the sun? At this scale, we're talking about going down to Lake Michigan and shooting a BB gun into the bottom end and waiting to see the energy output at the other end, hundreds of miles away. I hear all the time, energy in, energy out, but that is the scale that we're talking about. If the sun is 1,300,000 times the size of the Earth and a 5-kilometer comet hits it, we're seriously talking about a reaction at this scale. What would be truly shocking is if you shot a BB gun into the south end here and then you measured a 50-foot wave at the other end. I mean, here comes your BB. It's leaving a big long trail. And then that BB hits the water. And you get a big, huge tsunami coming out the other side. The energy in is nowhere near equivalent to the energy out on this. And look, I understand the electric universe part of things, but that would be like having a bug zapper that is 5 miles long and then a mosquito running into it. You're not even going to see the little flash from the mosquito. So if you ask me, this is showing that there's a big problem with the size that we're told of the sun.